The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am very pleased to be able to speak to this motion. Like many of my colleagues, as many of my colleagues know, I am a former member of the Canadian Armed Forces, and before that I was a medical assistant for the Canadian Armed Forces, so that is a career that is linked. And if I do want to talk about this motion, it is because the 3 election campaigns that I led because of my military past, many people asked me, Christine, what purpose do our armed forces serve now? I don't really understand. I know that they go and do missions abroad, but I don't really understand. And it seems to me that they should be more focused on our needs here at home. And that is when the topic of search and rescue often comes up, because that is a task that our armed forces execute directly in order to protect and assist the Canadian public, rescuing people who are in need. And that is something that is really refocused on our needs when we talk about search and rescue. In fact, the Canada First Defence strategy, when we think of that strategy, I would say that search and rescue is an integral component of that. When we talk about search and rescue, we talk about helping, protecting, serving Canadian citizens first. And so to have very high-level search and rescue norms is entirely appropriate and in line with that strategy. And the type of armed forces that Canadians want in order to defend and serve them. I would also like to specify that as a medical assistant in the armed forces, for us it is really a dream to be able to work in search and rescue, because when we do this type of work, we are really serving Canadian society. We're saving lives. And in fact, every year in the armed forces with the reserve, we did our search and rescue exercises, and that is something that we took very, very seriously, because when we have to do it for real, when we have to save someone whose life is really in danger, then we want to be able to do so. So those were exercises that were extremely appreciated by soldiers in training. So we must understand that search and rescue is something that is very key in this country. Before continuing, I would like to read the motion as such, because it is an excellent motion, so I will take the time to read it. So the motion is as follows: that the House acknowledge that Canada lags behind international search and rescue norms, and urge the government to recognize the responsibility of the Canadian Forces for the protection of Canadians, and to take such measures as may be required for Canada to achieve the common international readiness standard of 30 minutes at all times, from tasking to becoming airborne in response to search and rescue incidents. So we'll come back to this motion, but what we must understand here is that it is an excellent text, and there are many elements that will help us better understand it. If we talk about international readiness standards, the fact of establishing this at 30 minutes comes from a report that was produced by CECOM International, which is a company that is specialized in emergency preparedness. So this company prepared a report on the Standing Committee on National Defense, and in this report, Canada ranks last behind Australia, Ireland, the UK, and the United States in terms of international readiness standards. So I think that that's fairly dismal when we know that Canada is trying to be a leader in search and rescue, and that we rank last. I think, well, it is essential that we try and do better. I would like to point out first that when we talk about the readiness standard, that is the time that is elapsed between when the authorities give an order and the time when the aircraft or the boat or the vehicle leaves the base in order to carry out the search and rescue mission. So that is the time, this 30 minutes. where between when the order is given and when people head out to execute the mission. And it must also be understood it can take a long time before they reach the person, because it can take over 2 hours. It can take 3 or 4 hours of flight time or of navigation in order to reach the person who is in need of rescue. So that is something that I wanted to point out. In order to give you an overview of the number of rescues that SARTEX must perform, I would just like to give you an example that there are 300 joint rescue centers, and they're in Halifax, Trenton, and Victoria. And each year, those centers have some 1,100 interventions. So we're talking about 20,000 people, and they save some 1,200 lives each year. So I think that it is very important that we keep those figures in mind.
Now I want to come back to the problem that led to the introduction of this motion. Right now, the Canadian Forces have a particular mechanism for search and rescue depending on the time. They've got a 30-minute window from 8 to 4 and between 4 p.m. and 8 a.m., as well as on weekends and holidays. It is 120 minutes, that is 2 hours. So between the time the order is given and the plane or vessel leaves, it can be as long as 2 hours. And of course, there is still the time that it takes to get to the incident site, and that might be 2 hours. So it is a very long window. The majority of these situations, we have to understand, are emergencies and require this search and rescue intervention, and they often occur outside the 8 to 4 timeline. And so we've got the 2 hours between the order and the departure, and we have to understand that if people leave during the day to go on a little trip or to go out to do work and so on, it is only when people are concerned that the travelers have not returned at night, and that's when they decide that there is a problem, that something may have happened. And now, after that time, when they phone in the emergency, it can take up to 2 hours. So if someone calls at 6 o'clock to say that there is a problem, then it will take this 2-hour period, and it would have been better to leave earlier to be able to work in the daylight rather than at night. Everyone here would agree that if you called the hospital because your spouse was having a heart attack and you were told that it will take 2 hours before the ambulance can leave, then I think no one would consider that acceptable. Or if you were told, well, usually it would take 30 minutes for us to send the ambulance out, but right now people are eating, we will have to wait, it will be up to 2 hours. So keep doing your CPR. I hope that you're a strong person. That would make no sense, because we can never choose when an emergency will arise. I would also like to specify one last time that when we talk about search and rescue, when we talk about emergency medical care, it is not the case that we don't need it as much at night. Maybe there are fewer people, but we need to be able to react as quickly. The Conservative government's budget makes certain choices. When it comes to the Canadian Forces, we need to have high standards so that we can make sure that our search and rescue operations are efficient and effective. This is a choice that the government is making. They can make the choice to do it right and not to jeopardize Canadians' lives.
Resuming debate, the Honourable